welcome. Thank you so much. Feel free to sit, get settled. We're going to have a nice evening, so you've got time. My name is Linda Holmes. I want to welcome you all to this very first presentation of the Aspen Words Literary Prize. It's such an enormous honor to be here with these wonderful finalists. These books have haunted and moved me. I'm sure they've done the same for many of you. I work at NPR, National Public Radio, and most of the time I write about pop culture for them, and I host a podcast called Pop Culture Happy Hour. And I want to talk a little bit, you'll be hearing more about the Aspen Institute and how their logo makes me believe it will eventually be spring. And I want to talk a little bit about why NPR is involved in this partnership. As you probably know, if you deal with books, our listeners and our readers care profoundly about books. They tell us every time we ask them. They tell us if we forget to ask them. They remind us to ask them. And that is true whether they are what you might think of as a traditional NPR listener, I welcome your tote bag jokes, or whether they are a lot of the people that I deal with in my job who also love Netflix and, pop music and hip hop. They love books. But I think there's another reason as well. I was talking recently to a friend of my parents who is a wonderful, wise Quaker lady of the kind that I've had the good fortune to grow up around a lot of. And we were speaking about the state of the world and my position in it and my questions about my position in it. And what she said to me was, it can be hard to figure out at times how we're meant to be of service. And I think that journalism and fiction answer one similar impulse about the way we are to be of service. And that is to try to give people an opportunity to try to respect and reflect the stories that they know, and to fill in the stories that they imagine, and to bring to them the stories that they perhaps can't even possibly imagine. I think that's an imperative in journalism. It's also an imperative in fiction, and I think you'll find it in all of these finalists. So for NPR, this is an incredibly natural partnership, even for somebody like me who doesn't normally cover books. And I will say, if you'll pardon my hustle, today, I turned in the final manuscript of my own first novel. And I promise you will not hear about it again for the next very short while. But I'm here to introduce, first I have to undertake what I think in this building and in this company is a rather sacred ritual, if you'll excuse me. I'm here to introduce the Executive Vice President of Aspen Institute, who's going to talk to you a little bit about Aspen. And you'll be hearing more about them and about these wonderful books. You'll be hearing from these finalists in a panel conversation. So right now, I want to introduce Elliot Gerson, the Executive Vice President of the Aspen Institute.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. We at Aspen are absolutely delighted to be here. I want to just tell you a little bit about the genesis of this wonderful idea. It was almost, I think, exactly 5 years ago, not too many blocks from here, where Adrian Brodeur, whom you'll be hearing more from and about, and one can't say enough about, had this idea. And I liked it immediately. And I think one thing that I especially liked about it was how it really brought together the founding spirit and ideas and ideals of the Aspen Institute. When Walter Pepke founded the Aspen Institute in 1949, he wanted to create something that was rooted firmly in the humanities and that looked to the humanities to inform the most critical problems and issues of the day. And what better than to tie that original founding spirit with the kinds of challenges that we have today and the continuing fundamental value and significance of the humanities, and especially literature, to illuminate the most critical problems that we have. We developed the idea over the next several years, looking at other literary prizes, looking at the landscape and doing some due diligence. And then, through the intervention of an extraordinary philanthropist who remains anonymous, voila, we had it. And it was the combination of that inspiring idea of Adrian, and then the Institute and its roots, and then the means that led to where we are today. The mission is very much as it was originally envisioned. The Aspen Words Literary Prize is awarded annually to an influential work of fiction that illuminates a vital contemporary issue and demonstrates the transformative power of literature on thought and action. And I don't think any of us could have possibly imagined just how successful this idea would become, even before we had the opportunity to generate a great deal of publicity for it. There were 144 nominations, a long list of 20 great books, and now these 5 extraordinary finalists. So let me also tell you briefly about the team. I've already mentioned Adrienne, a writer and editor whose whole career has been devoted to literary endeavors. And she, since arriving at Aspen Words, first as our creative director, and then becoming our executive director, she, with her team, has just moved Aspen Words to ever broader scope, reach, and impact. Jamie Kravitz, at Aspen Words, I think off and on for maybe 15 years, if that's possible, Jamie, has really been at the heart and essence of Aspen Words from the very beginning, through challenging times and now these great times, and she's now in every sense a full professional partner with Adrian. And finally, Carolyn Troy, deserving kudos galore for masterminding all the details of the launch for this prize, and also, of course, today's event. We couldn't be more proud of the team, and also incredibly appreciative of the judges and the selection committee. And finally, Aspen Words could not possibly have imagined a better leader of the Institute to come on at just this time, given his own background as a scholar of English, and indeed someone who teaches literature, and especially literature that illuminates issues such as those relating to human rights, to social justice, and also his passion professionally, education, and especially inclusive education for everyone. It is my great pride and privilege to introduce the new president and CEO of the Aspen Institute, Dan Porterfield.
Thank you, Elliot, for that gracious introduction and for your remarkable leadership and tenacity in making the world a better place during the past 14 years and more that you have been such a transformational leader at the Aspen Institute. It's just thrilling to be here with you gathered today. This is actually my first event as President-elect, CEO-elect. And it's just wonderful to be gathered together in community in the name of literature, creativity, culture, inclusion, justice, humanity. Thank you all for being here this evening. As Elliot said, the Aspen Words Literary Prize recognizes a work of fiction and the work of fiction. And it's the work of fiction that binds us together and that provides such an insistent inspiration in this world that we inhabit today. Tonight we congratulate all 144 writers who were nominated, all 20 who were long list authors, with so many works of enthralling and meaningful literature created by that big group. And we celebrate today 5 awesome finalists and their creations that dare readers of all backgrounds to confront, deepen, expand, and perhaps change our views, seeing and, as Linda said, serving the world anew. I'm not sure who's here today because just came here late, but I know that Mohsin Hamid and Jessamine Ward have scheduling conflicts that prevented them from coming. I'm hoping that here tonight may be Leslie Neka Arima, Cinci Clements, and Samar Upadhyay joining us in recognition of their just tremendous work. I look forward to meeting each of you afterwards. Thank you to our authors for works that were no doubt the result of very deep thought, of probing observation, personal experience, collective hope, joy, pain, courage, and love. And of course, long nights writing, and even longer and more painful nights editing what you've written. We all know that feeling, and it's a gift to be able to celebrate your work this evening. Their brilliant creations are ambitious, inventive, and audacious. In so many ways, they are the opposite of the click-based, slogan-driven, fake news-heavy culture with which true writers and intellectuals compete these days. It takes a vision and it takes a village to create a prize such as this one and to build it to last for years and years and decades to come. The Aspen Literary Prize will be an important signature moment in letters and in culture. So I have some thanks to extend. First to Team Aspen Words, the visionary impresaria, Adrian Brodeur, Jamie Kravitz, Carolyn Torrey, the entire staff, many in Aspen, that have worked to the success of this prize in this moment and worked for the long term. Thank you to the Aspen Words donors and board members, some here today. In particular, the anonymous donors who made the transformational gift that will make this evening something that goes on and on and on in perpetuity. All members of our Society of Fellows and all members of the Aspen Institute Board are supportive of this pioneering new mission for our Institute, and all send their thanks, and I thank them in turn. Thank you to our prize judges, exceptionally busy people, very, very thoughtful, lovers of literature and of learning. Stephen Carter, Jessica Fullerton, Phil Cly, Alondra Nelson, Akhil Sharma. Big job. I hope you'll keep doing it in the years to come, and I know probably there's nobody more grateful than those judges for the work of our artists. Thank you to NPR, extraordinary media partner doing work that matters across our culture in all of its coverage, particularly to Ellen Silva, and a special thanks to Michelle Martin and Linda Holmes for agreeing to moderate and MC. The Aspen Institute may be our country's preeminent convener of thinkers and leaders for conversation that matters and words that lead to action. We have expertise in problem posing and problem solving, which is one of the definitions of literature, and strive to be a force for justice in a society that is at times heavy with misunderstanding or conflict or prejudice or cynicism or sadness. Dr. King calls us to counter those forces, to put our bodies and our souls in motion for change. Literature helps to do that. It adds richness to our lives, the lives of the one and the many. It feeds the spirit that bonds us together. It asks us to see the cultures within our culture and to imagine together what more we can be as a society. This is core to the work of a good culture, a good society. It's core to the work of Aspen. Nadine Gordimer called writing honestly about unjust social conditions in her country of South Africa a, quote, essential gesture as a citizen and as a human being. We thank our authors this evening for their essential gestures in hope and faith, with admirations for the work they've made, which add to the human tapestry of our times. Thank you. Thank you.
Aspen Words Literary Prize is all about celebrating books that expand our understanding of the world. We can think of no better way to move beyond the bubble of individual experience than through the richness of great fiction. So, before we had a long list or a short list, we started asking people on social media, our friends, families, authors, what book made you see the world differently?
When I was in high school, I read The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Junot Diaz, and it completely changed what I thought a story could be. I mean, you know, when you think about the typical book you read in a high school classroom and who those stories are told about, it's never like a Dominican American growing up in the hood with his ties to the island, speaking the way we speak regularly in Spanish and in English, right? I'd never seen that. I'd never seen myself in a text where I felt like, that's me.
The book that has shaped my worldview is Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. I've read that about 10 times. I taught it in prison. I've written about it as a PhD student. I've shared it with my mentees and said, please read this book. No book I've ever read has filled me with pride in our country, at the same time awareness of all the ways we have to do better to live up to our values than Invisible Man.
Our mission at Aspen Words is to encourage writers, inspire readers, and connect people through the power of stories. And the Aspen Words Literary Prize catalyzes that mission and connects it to the broader Aspen Institute mission, which is to spark intellectual inquiry and elevate values-based leadership.
We received a pretty amazing long list of books that tackled every kind of social issue and also tackled them from really different directions. One of the really amazing things that fiction can do is show us what possibilities there are for us beyond the kind of normal debates that we have about social issues. And I think that the books that we ended up picking really do that in amazing ways.
It was also a great pleasure to read short stories and novels together and think about what they can do uniquely to convey and illuminate social issues.
Leslie Nicodema's What It Means When a Man Falls from the Sky is just this marvelous, wild, and also at the same time devastating collection. I think it's a remarkable collection that both diagnoses our current society and then uses fantasy and magical realism and myth and legend to be able to imagine other ways of thinking.
In Sing Unburied Sing, Jessamine Ward is really writing at the height of her powers. It's poetic and it's lyrical, it's complex, multi-layered, and intricate. But in some places it's also when it has to be plainly said. There's also literal ghosts in the story that haunt the characters and link the present and the past, and also offer us an opportunity to think about the future that this family might want, that's bound together both by sorrow and loss, and about the futures that we all imagine for our society.
Cinci Clements' novel, What We Lose, is first and foremost a novel about grief, about the loss of a parent, and what one does after that. And yet, the personal is always political. And so this is not just a personal novel because she writes with such intelligence and acute care when talking about the ways in which social issues, issues of class, issues of gender, issues of race, issues of immigration can intrude and affect and change the relationships that we have even within our own families.
It was such a pleasure to read Mad Country. The stories are about Nepal and the United States and places in between. What does it mean to be a brown-skinned immigrant to the United States and to think about racism and police brutality in the United States? How do we see it differently from a different vantage, from the perspective of someone who's new here and is also having to learn to deal with the very American conundrum of racial identity?
The first thing that stunned me reading Exit West, Mohsin Hamid's magical realist novel about refugees, was just the exquisite sentences. He uses those sentences to build up this incredible portrait of two lovers in a war zone. He forces us to ask how we would react, what kind of potential there is for reactionary violence within our own societies, and he also hints at possibilities for doing better. And I think that that is something vital right now.
We were looking for books that illuminated the human experience.
For all of the books that are on the finalist list is that I found myself thinking through the issues they raise and puzzling over the questions that they posed long after I'd finished them.
timing was slightly off there. I like to leave a dramatic pause. So those are our finalists. So working at NPR, one of the great pleasures of it is some of the people that I get to call my colleagues. Is working at NPR the way I got to spit Sondheim lyrics back and forth with Ari Shapiro? Yes, it is. Is it how I found out that at least at one point Scott Simon's ringtone was Firework by Katy Perry? Yes, it is. But I am here tonight to introduce Michelle Martin. Michelle hosts, you can hear her every weekend hosting All Things Considered. She was also the host of the groundbreaking NPR show, Tell Me More. And Michelle, I will tell you, is one of the few people who has encouraged roundtable discussions on our air, similar to the kind that are now extraordinarily popular in the podcast space. So when I look for producers who can cut my roundtable podcast, it's always good if they have worked with Michelle. Michelle's an extraordinary reporter and a great host, but I tell people always, if you want to see Michelle at the height of her powers, you have to see Michelle in conversation. So please join me in welcoming Michelle Martin. And our finalists.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. And I will start with something that the minister said to my husband and I when we got married, which is you should just start every morning by saying, I'm sorry. That way you'll be covered for the rest of the day. And I'm going to start by saying I'm sorry because we could spend an hour with each of you individually, all of your wonderful work, and we're only going to have the chance to scratch the surface. So I wanted to say thank you all, and I'm sorry, but we'll do the best we can to talk about your wonderful work, and then we are going to be so excited to hear a reading from each of you, and so thank you again for being here. And I just wanted to start by asking each of you why you're a writer. Leslie, do you want to start? No, so yes. Why are you a writer?
You know, that's a good question, and one that I haven't really had to think about for quite a while. I think that I am a writer, you know, and I don't want to say, to sort of go the grandiose way and say I could do nothing else, I'd rather die, which I think is untrue. I mean, like most people who don't write are able to live just fine. But I think that writing satisfies something inside of me that nothing else does. And so even when I wasn't a writer, when I was just thinking about being a writer, I knew that this was the thing that would sort of like soothe that particular itch. And that was part of the motivation towards pursuing writing, was like, okay, I need to, whether it's get it out of my system or whatnot, this is the one.
Cinci, what about you? Why are you a writer?
I do think that it's an identity. So I think that people are predisposed to it, and for me, I very much felt that, and I think it's a matter if you decide to make that into your career, but I do think it's something that you're predisposed to.
Well, when did you decide that you were one? Or when do you remember when you started to, if people say, well, what do you do, Cinci? Well, I'm from DC, that's like hello. So, what point at which you started writing it on your taxes, or people asking, Cinci, what are you up to? And you said, oh, I'm a writer. Right? When was that?
So I guess the way that I discovered it is sort of why I think that way, because I consider myself as having come to writing late. I started writing in college in my first year of undergrad because I was looking for an outlet, and I just discovered that I liked it and I was good at it, and I had never really tried it before. And so that's why I say it's something that I could always do before I was doing it. So I really do feel that it's something that is at least partly within you.
Summer, what about you?
I think I'm a writer because it allows me to inhabit other people's worlds and their minds. Because I feel like my life is fairly limited. I'm a college professor. I go teach. I come back home. I have a family life. But writing just allows me to enter these spaces that I would not be able to enter in my own life or with my physical body. So there's something wonderful about the imagination that allows us to like make these leaps into different worlds. And I think I don't separate my writing with my reading too. So literature also allows me to do the same thing when I read other people's work.
Was that a hard place for you to come to? I just cannot help but note that a lot of us come from backgrounds where our parents would like us to have jobs that they understand. You're a dentist, okay, you're an engineer, and then if you're not that, they're like, I failed.
Right. Yeah.
So was that a hard place for you to get to?
Fortunately for me, I left Nepal and came to the U.S. when I was 21. So my parents had no clue what I was doing, and so it helped me tremendously.
And when they found out,
when they found out, they were a little bit uncertain, but they were fairly supportive. But they were uncertain. They didn't know because among South Asians, a lot of them come for computer or other technological sort of subjects. So
you told them you were a dentist, and they were fine.
Yeah.
Shout out to dentists; they're really important. But I mean, it's something that this award seeks to honor and encourage writing that expands perspectives, builds compassion. And you are all here because you have been deemed to choose work that changes, expands, and confronts new ideas. And I wondered if that's something that is in your mind when you're doing your work. Samra, do you want to start? Is that something that you want to do, or is that a happy byproduct of the work that you choose to do anyway?
I think it's a sort of a icing on the cake, but it's not what I think about when I'm in the process of writing. When I'm writing, I just want to tell a good story, and I want to create characters who are compelling, who are contradictory, who have a gamut of emotions in them, and who are struggling with something very tangible in life. And I think I am interested in issues of race and gender and nation, but I don't gear my writing towards it. I'm more interested in creating characters who are multidimensional.
Cinci, what about you? Are you interested in changing people's minds about something when you are doing your work?
I must admit I am, and perhaps that comes across in the writing. But I think it's probably less about trying to encourage empathy, at least consciously. I agree, I'm just trying to tell a good story, and I think usually, perhaps because of my particular situation, it's more about expressing myself. And if I'm able to do that well enough and, sort of package the message in a way that appeals to readers, that is what happens. That empathy is created. But I think I agree with Sam that it's not a part of my project when I'm sitting down very much.
Leslie, what about you?
When I set out to put this collection together, I told myself, I hope that people read this and learn absolutely nothing. And the reason I said that is because there is sort of a particular pressure or a certain way that African literature is read. And it's read as, here are your vegetables, right? Learn about, here's your way to sort of grow as a person, and, learn about the world beyond your borders, et cetera, et cetera. And so I did not want to write in a way that felt as though like the West was my audience. I very deliberately wrote for sort of the Nigerian and like as I sort of term myself Nigerian-ish of folks and I think that it's one of those situations where, of course, people are going to learn, and of course that they are going to come away with a multidimensional view of these particular Nigerian people. But it was very important for me, just like on the page, that I was writing for me, first of all, and not to educate and not to inform.
Well, how did you come to that decision, realization that that's what your project was? And it's interesting that you say that, because I'm not going to say who it is. There's a particular figure in the media that just really pushes my buttons, and part of the reason, and there's a lot of people you could probably, and part of the reason that this person pushes my buttons is that she has like nothing of substance to say, and it just irks the hell out of me. And pardon my language, Aspen, so classy, trying to be classy, but trying to like elevate. And when I said this to one of my friends, and she says, why do black women always have to be, teaching you something? Let her just be stupid. And I was like, but your work is not stupid. I mean, I'm sorry.
Team Cardi.
Yeah.
Team Cardi, is that who?
No,
okay.
No, I like her.
Well, no,
she's adorable.
I do feel as though that, I wanted like these, there's a certain sort of pressure that's put upon African writers, especially young African writers, where, the artists are the ones who are going to fix the country, da-da-da-da. And it's like, as artists, all we can do are write our ideas, write our stories, write the stories that are sort of burrowed in us. I can't ensure that so-and-so gets paid on time. And I feel like there's a certain sort of burden that's put on African writers, both from within the continent and without, to sort of fix things in a way, or to be the voice of, and being the voice of requires a certain sort of smoothing of complexity and having characters that are easily, valorized. And I didn't want anything to do with that. I wanted to write people who are often unpleasant and wrong and still worthy of literature.
Who's putting this pressure? Is there a meeting or something?
Right.
Who's putting this pressure? Is it?
It's more sort of like the conversation that comes around when African literature is discussed, and I mean, it happens in so many different venues. But it feels like there's a meeting, because they're all saying the same things.
Really?
I feel like there's like a memo that goes out, and that this is the definition of what's considered appropriate ground for African literature, and then everyone sort of follows suit.
Good to know. Cinci, what about you? You're kind of, Leslie is Nigerian-ish.
I'm South African-ish.
You're South African-ish.
I'm going to borrow that.
do you, not that Leslie needs you to co-sign, but I'm wondering, did you feel the same pressure? Did you feel like that there's a meeting somewhere where there's like this is what you're supposed to do to uplift the people or whatever, or fix it, or something like this?
I mean, I feel that in relationship to being an African American. I haven't really traveled very much with the book in South Africa yet. I'm going to next month, so maybe I can update you afterwards. But I did go to a festival we were talking about in Nigeria a few months ago, and there was, particularly for writers from Nigeria, this particular real passion about them, and you could see at the end of every reading, all the writers would just be swarmed, and there were huge audiences, and people were just so rapt. And I do feel like there is, because of how Africa is represented and treated, I think that people do feel like when we have a voice, it's important, and they're very invested in that voice. So I did sort of see it from the outside. Maybe I will see it from the inside in a month.
You had something interesting to say, if you were quoted accurately, when you spoke to a news outlet that I like, but it wasn't mine, so I'm not going to say. And you said, "I've often felt being a light-skinned black woman is like being a well-dressed person who is also homeless." So many things that we could talk about, but I wondered, is the physicality of you something that informs the work as well as the way you walk in the world? And is that also a part of your sort of two-ness, the dual identity? I want to talk to all of you about that because all of you cross borders in your work as well as in your lives. So if you would start, Cinci, talk about that if you would. Is that the kind of, when you're saying here, is it the way you walk in the world because you're a writer, because of your physical appearance, because of, what do you think?
Well, that line's actually in the book, and it's specifically about being mixed race. I made it centered on complexion because I thought that it's an experience that actually does apply to people in different identities, but you can probably apply it to anyone who is in between but also occupies a privileged position. Because when you are in the middle, there's always a lot of fighting about which one you belong to, or I feel alternately claimed and kicked out by every group that I sort of am implicated in. And that statement is about sort of how it feels to be at the same time desired and prized and sort of held on a pedestal, but at the same time, because you are in between, and that's the two-ness, that it's lonely inside, and that's the main sort of thing. So I was trying to, sort of reach for a metaphor that could address that complexity and the contradiction there. So that's what that was about.
It's exquisite. I mean, well, you also said that, all writers are outsiders for some reason. Do you think that's true? Do you all agree? All writers are outsiders in some way. You're sort of standing apart. And do you all agree?
I would say so. I can only speak of myself as a writer, and I've always been an outsider. And it's so funny because, we moved to the United States when I was 13, and of course, and we moved to Louisiana, so like part of that being an outsider was like, being this strange Nigerian child in, the middle of the bayou. And just sort of how that worked out, or did not work out, to be more specific. But I was talking to someone, it might have been my sister or somebody who, and I had always been a little strange, even before I was sort of like the coding that happens when you move to the United States, and it's like, is this person like cool or not? I think I've always been not, regardless of whichever cultural circumstance I was in. And so...
we think you're cool.
Stop it.
But anyway.
You will come to regret that. But yeah, so for me, that was actually quite a comfort to me to realize that, because it's like, no, it's not because I wasn't able to sort of find my place in the American culture. It's that I couldn't find my place anywhere, and that's just the way that I am. And it means that I'm always observing, and observing, at least it helps me to sort of understand and catalog humans in a way that I can manipulate and cannibalize for my work, so that's great.
So what do you think? What do you
Yes, I think we're outsiders. I think we're outsider insiders. So in a sense, we're outsiders because we have to look at whatever the material we're looking at, we have to look at it objectively. But we're also insiders in the sense that we have access to certain things that other people might not have. You talked about us crossing borders, and I'm reminded of Salman Rushdie when he came out with Midnight Children. He also had a collection of stories called Imaginary Homelands. And he said that people who are on the outside can look at, he used the metaphor of broken mirrors when they're looking at. So the broken mirror is a fragmented approach, but it can also provide sudden clarity and angles and visions that normally you might not be able to access. So I think outsiders is good, but at the same time, I'm not sure that we should, sometimes artists rely too much on the outsider perspective. I think the insider perspective is as equally important.
So I was curious about your thoughts on this, in part because of one of your incredible stories in your collection, Mad Country, America, the Great Equalizer. And have you read it? Have the rest of you read it? Yeah, it's incredible because for many reasons. But do you want to tell it, or do you want me to tell it? Do you want me to?
Why don't you tell it? I'm interested in hearing
well,
what you have to say. I know what I'm going to say.
It's about a Nepali grad student who's studying in the U.S. and becomes very interested. You were talking about like how in America you got to you're the coding, you got to pick your spot, and he realizes that he's dark skinned, he's dark complected. At least, and I don't know whether he'd be considered dark complected by an American context, but he has this consciousness of himself as being dark, and then he starts reflecting, really for the first time when he comes to America, about what role his complexion has played in his life all along. And I don't want to give too much away, but he starts to really identify with African Americans. And that doesn't always go as well as he would like.
Right.
Let's put it that way. And one of the reasons that it was intriguing to me is that it's located around the time of Michael Brown's being killed in Ferguson. And since I was in Ferguson 3 weeks after he was killed, it was very real to me, the settings that you... And it was also, too, a lot about the other people in his Nepali circle. And even if he was trying to identify with African Americans, they had very different views. Let me put it that way. In fact, we're very how can I just say racist? Very racist toward,
of course,
toward African Americans. All the stereotypes: lazy, shiftless. And he's like, wait, but you, this kind of thing. So anyway, I was very intrigued by this because this is something that I think it's fair to say is. One of the dirty little secrets of the American urban experience, right? Is that, we use that term people of color, but people of color disaggregate.
Right, and we're not uniform. And one of the things, the genesis of that story was, because the discussion of racial politics in America tends to be literally black and white. But there are shades of color, and there are people crossing borders. And I wanted to, get a sense of that. What happens to like a recent immigrant who is trying to come to terms with it? And of course, the racism that is also existing in among immigrant communities also needed to be tackled. That story was very hard for me to write. It was very hard for me to get in. I've never written a story like that. I've never written a story that deals explicitly with racial politics in the U.S. It was very hard for me to find the balance, getting into that character, but also drawing upon his own sensitivity about his skin color, which doesn't have the same historical implications as it would be for an African American, given the history of slavery in this country. So it was hard. It was a hard story to write. But
what started you on it? What was the key? What sparked you?
It was actually discussions that I encountered in immigrant communities, and some in Nepali, some in Indian communities, about the Ferguson riots. And the kind of comments I was hearing
Can you tell us some of the comments?
Well, you don't have to read the story. The comments are in the story.
Oh,
so,
they're all...
Yeah.
You can share. Go ahead. Go ahead. Give us a taste. It's all on the internet.
Well, there is one comment I remember about Michael Brown while he was shot. And someone I know said, but he was jaywalking. And it just seemed like such an incredible statement to me. And I think it's important for readers to know that there are those perspectives out there, even among immigrant communities.
You think they don't know?
I'm not sure. It's something that it's not. So I wanted to write a story that I normally would not read. I haven't encountered as much. Let me put it that way.
So Cinci, sex.
My family's here. Just so you know.
How do you decide to write about it? You were saying in one of your interviews that you've always written about sex, and why do you decide to write about it? Where does it fit?
Maybe this is a good opportunity to shade my dad a little bit, since he's an audience. I love you, Dad. But I think part of the reason why I do write about it is because it wasn't actually talked about very much in my household. And I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, and it's a relatively liberal town, but it's still, I think, pretty Puritan in nature and culture. And so there wasn't a lot of discussion. There weren't many people who were out when I was younger, like out, queer and out. And I think it came from like a corrective impulse, or maybe like, I couldn't say this before, now I can, So it definitely came from me, from not being able to or not feeling like I was allowed to for a long time. And then, of course, there's also the layer that when I did finally feel able to talk about sex in my adult life, I didn't see it being written about from a female perspective very, very honestly. And so then I felt like, as a writer, there was another thing that I was being told not to do, told to be quiet, and so I wanted to talk about it. Yeah.
How is it now that it's out in the world? I'm always fascinated by that when people write about something that most of us don't even discuss with our closest, friends, if at all. All these TV shows notwithstanding, which is why it's TV, because it's fake. You know what I mean? It's like, who talks like that, Or maybe I'm just telling you who my friends are. I'm just telling you that. So what's it like having that out in the world? I mean, there's so much that's vulnerable in your work anyway. I mean, the loss of a parent, so many things that are so tender and vulnerable. And so but as a young woman, especially, in an age when, we didn't, social media wasn't, when you started your career, you didn't have to deal with trolls. I mean,
No.
No,
not at all.
No. So I'm just saying, you grew up with it, right? You grew up with social media as being just always knowing that it was there. And I'm just wondering, what's it like to have not that it's, autobiographical, but just the degree to which people are going to assume that there's certain things that are, just because that's the way our minds work. And I'm just saying, what's it like to put these vulnerable things in the world?
Well, I think, first of all, because I started writing in adulthood, I very much remember really vividly the reasons why I did it initially and continued to do it. So that's all very clear, my motives. And one of my motives was very similarly to what I just described for why I wanted to start writing about sex is I felt like I could express myself in an extremely direct manner. And the idea of having a space for creativity that was completely blank for me was really important. I was a visual artist before I was a writer, and you have the same ability, you still have, it's a blank canvas, but the thing that I like about writing is that you are everything. So I can express myself most directly. It doesn't have to be filtered through something else or through, assistants who help me create a sculpture or something. It's all you. And that really appealed to me, and I think that's also a big part of my writing. I think it's highly confessional, and to me that's part of the point, is to be able to express yourself in the way that you want to. It's part of the appeal to me.
And Leslie, what about you? How do you start? I mean, one of the things that I think many people have noted about the stories in the collection is that they're all so different. They're shockingly different. You know what I mean? You read one and you think, and then you go to another and you think, oh, well, that's something wrong. Wait. And then you go,
That was the exact effect.
How do you start?
Oh.
Yeah, what gets you started?
That's a different question, I think, from the collection as a whole, what gets me started is in exploring these varied worlds is that I read a lot growing up, and I know that this is not an interesting or particularly new story. Everyone who eventually becomes a writer is somebody who loves books, who reads a lot. But when I say I read a lot, I mean my sister and I would go to the library, and we would each take a duffel bag of my father's, and we would check out the maximum amount of books, which is 50. So
50?
50. So she would get 50, I would get 50, and then we'd read our own 50, and then trade, and then read each other's 50, and we would do this this was how we spent our time. So when I say that I read a lot, I mean I read a lot. And I was no respecter of genres, and so I read pretty widely across the spectrum, from classic literature, and I memorized Hamlet when I was 13. I don't know, I just wanted to. Things like that, to Westerns and science fiction and romance and fantasy. I read everything I could get my hands on. And so when it came time to put a collection together, or even when I started writing short stories, before I knew that I had a collection, it's I have all of these varied types of ways that stories work in my head, and all these, and so I wrote a short story that's realism, and the next one was science fiction, and the next one was fantasy, and I just wanted to write works that I would be interested in reading, but also eventually when the book came together, I wanted to sort of pay homage to that sort of very, very, very curious young girl who found everything fascinating and still does.
That's lovely. That's lovely. I did want to go back to this question of crossing borders, crossing boundaries, crossing water. Trying to figure out how to ask this. This used to be something that people esteemed and admired. It's it was something remarkable to cross water. You are a brave. You are, and yet we live in a different time when, for some people, it's very dangerous, and it's very much you're not, you don't belong here, that kind of thing. And I wondered. So each of you have had the experience that many, many, many people in America do have now, but that many people don't. And I wonder how you see your experience. Do you see yourselves as kind of emissaries, as people who show that it is still important and necessary to do? Or do you see what I'm asking you? What do you... I remember, gosh, growing up here in Brooklyn, it's just everybody I knew, I wanted to be from somewhere else just because everybody I knew was, but then I grew up and met other people who would, when they would go back to their home countries, other people would disdain them for it. They'd be like, why are you going back to make them rich? You're here now. And so I wondered, is each of you have this experience that is very similar to that a lot of people have, but also very different than a lot of people have, and something that is not universally esteemed at the moment, if I can put it that way?
I actually have, I run a project at Indiana University where I teach, where I take students to Nepal. And the project is called The Writer in the World, Cultural Space and Displacement. So that's the fancy title that gets me the grants. But the idea is that something happens to your mind when you travel and you go to a different place, and hopefully that'll also do something to your creativity. It definitely creates empathy. It could create compassion, and you'll be able to translate that into writing. And I think that comes about as a sort of a reflection of my own life trajectory. I grew up in Nepal. I came here when I was 21. The way I see it is that most of my emotional growth took place in Nepal, my formative years, but my intellectual and my professionalization happened here. and I became a writer in America. I think it was basically America's sort of openness. I thought I was going to study business or commerce or something like that, and I came here, and I realized, oh, you can actually study writing. You can be a literature major, and that's what I have always loved doing. I didn't have 50 books like Liz did, but maybe 20. So, for me, this is a way of, I felt like I expanded my mind, and I found something that I love doing. And I think this sort of a kind of a traveling, a traveling of minds really helps people and creates a better world.
Mm-hmm. Cinci, what about you? And then I'm going to have one more question, and then you're going to read, so no pressure.
I was thinking about your question, and I am not. I think what's going on is very complicated right now. I think that there still is, and perhaps this prize is proof of that, there still is a hunger for people who go out and have adventures, for lack of a better word. I've always been, I think, an adventurer, and that's how people see me, both here and primarily in South Africa. I think what's happening now is that there are a lot of people who are scared of that happening more and more. And as we blend more and travel more, I think the people who feel threatened by that are trying to sort of a last desperate grasp on it before it all kind of spirals out of control. And that's kind of what I see happening right now. I think that it's sort of a human thing to admire people who travel and go out into the world. And I think I actually see more people appreciating that. But at the same time, the impulse to control is getting stronger by certain people, who shall go unnamed at this moment.
Mm-hmm. Nessie, what about you?
I do not, circling back to your original question, I do not see myself as an emissary. Mm-hmm. And that it's like a very much a voluntary exclusion on my part, because I feel as though that there is so much pressure put on writers who are coming from non-Western or non-American countries, and there's so much pressure to sort of sell like BPR almost, right? Oh, we're just like you, da-da-da-da-da, sort of things. We want the same things you do. And I feel like those sorts of things are so patently obvious that I wonder what more is it that you're asking of us exactly. And so I feel like all I can do is to sort of be my own human person in this world and create my own human characters with my own art, and that is all I'm willing to do, because I think that the majority of the work that needs to happen isn't actually from the folks on the stage.
Mm. Well, before we turn to the reading, and I'm very delighted to have had the chance to visit with you, and thank you for letting me visit with you and sort of infiltrate your numbers as a person who only has no creativity and just lifts up other people's work. So thank you for that. We are going to hear readings from you in a moment. But I wanted to ask each of you very briefly. I don't know who's listening. I know that all of the people here love books, but we are live streamed, and my guess is that there's somebody out there who needs your encouragement. And so I wanted to ask you particularly if there is a young writer out there, a young writer, or perhaps even a person who has denied himself or herself that opportunity to write, who might be, just want your encouragement. What is your encouragement to your fellow writers? You want to start? Poor Leslie, I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah.
Your 15-year-old self, your 8-year-old self, your 70-year-old self that was denied this chance to write.
I guess I'd like to, if there was any particular group that I wanted to speak to, because I know the messages that they receive, to young Nigerian writers, particularly young Nigerian female writers, or might be able to broaden this to young African writers, young female African writers in general, which is to say that there is nothing that you will do that will ever cushion you from criticism that will make you happy. Misbehave, write all of the things that you want to write that you know are going to disappoint people, and sort of be radically honest with yourself and with everyone else.
Thank you. Cinci, what is your encouragement? I like that, misbehave. Go ahead. Cinci, what is your encouragement to someone who needs it?
I like that one as well, and I think mine is probably adjacent to it. I would say the things that you may be self-conscious of now or that people don't like about you when you're starting out are things that will be what people applaud you for later on. So as Leslie says, don't hide it under a rock, let it go free, and don't be afraid of it.
Well, thank you.
I think those are excellent, advices. I would say, the road is long, so you have to prepare yourself for the long haul, if you want to be a writer, and you need to read a lot. You just need to keep on reading and reading as many different kinds of books, as you can. I don't think you can be a writer without reading. Mm-hmm. And read our books.
That's right. Speaking of which, we now have a marvelous treat. We are going to hear a reading from each of the authors here, and also there are recorded samples from the two authors who were the two finalists who were not able to be here. And Leslie, will you start us off?
Yes.
And you were reading from, tell us the title of the book.
I will read a page from Light. The title of the book is What It Means When a Man Falls from the Sky. Take a breath about halfway through saying the title because it's so long, but yes. Light. When Enebeli Okwara sent his girl out in the world, he did not know what the world did to daughters. He did not know how quickly it would wick the dew off her, how she would be returned to him hollowed out, relieved of her better parts. Before this, they are living in Port Harcourt in a bungalow in the old Agbondo layout. The girl's mother is in America reading for a master's in business administration. She has been there for almost 3 years, in which her 11-year-old bud of a girl has bloomed. Enebeli and the girl have survived much in her absence, including a stampede at the market that separated them for hours, shoppers fleeing a commotion that turned out to be two warring market women who'd had just about enough of each other's tomatoes. They survived a sex talk, birthed by a careless joke an uncle had made at a wedding about the bride taking a cup of palm wine to her husband and leaving with a cup of, well, and the girl had questions he might as well answer before she asked someone who would take it as an invitation to demonstrate. They survived the crime scene of the girl's first period, where she proved to be as heavy a bleeder as she was a sleeper, the red seeping all the way through to the other side of the mattress. They survived the girl discovering this would happen every month.
Oh, Leslie, thank you. Leslie, Neka, Arima, everyone. Thank you. Cinci.
And I'm reading from What We Lose. Oh, that's not my page. Whoops. Sorry. Where did it go? So the where we are in the story doesn't really matter. It's part of why I chose this part. On this page, so this is a section of my book about Winnie Mandela, which I've chosen for perhaps hopefully obvious reasons. She passed away not long ago. And on this page, there's a black and white photo of Winnie and a bunch of other people, presumably ANC with their fists in the air. And I chose this photo because there's Winnie and her daughter Cinci in the foreground, who I was named after. Winnie Mandela bore a strong physical resemblance to my mother. They had the same complexion, same nose, same warm, unassuming smile. When I first heard the accusations against Mrs. Mandela, I weighed the brutality of the charges against her physical appearance. She could appear stern sometimes, as my mother could. No nonsense, the kind of woman you wouldn't want to encounter after sneaking home past curfew. But the dissonance between what she represented to the country, her nickname is Mother of the Nation, and what she is alleged to have done is almost impossible to reconcile. Almost impossible to reconcile if you believe that motherhood and brutality are diametrically opposed. The truth is that motherhood is stained with blood, tainted with suffering and the potential for tragedy. Why are we surprised when a mother, someone who takes care of her children and loves them, commits atrocious crimes? These are questions I wrestle with in the days and weeks that I consider my own pregnancy.
Cinci, Clements, thank you. And now if you'll turn your attention to the screen, we will hear a reading from Mohsin Hamid, who was unable to be here.
In a city swollen by refugees, but still mostly at peace, or at least not yet openly at war, a young man met a young woman in a classroom and did not speak to her for many days. His name was Said and her name was Nadia, and he had a beard, not a full beard, more a studiously maintained stubble. And she was always clad from the tips of her toes to the bottom of her jugular notch in a flowing black robe. Back then, people continued to enjoy the luxury of wearing more or less what they wanted to wear, clothing and hair-wise, within certain bounds, of course, and so these choices meant something. It might seem odd that in cities teetering at the edge of the abyss, young people still go to class, in this case, an evening class, on corporate identity and product branding. But that is the way of things, with cities as with life. For one moment, we are pottering about our errands as usual, and the next, we are dying. And our internally impending ending does not put a stop to our transient beginnings and middles until the instant when it does. Said noticed that Nadia had a beauty mark on her neck, a tawny oval that sometimes, rarely, but not never, moved with her pulse.
Samra, if you will give us a reading.
So I'm going to read the beginning portion of a story called Freak Street from my book, Mad Country. Sophie found a room on Freak Street. She practiced saying the street's real name, Jonche, as the locals called it, but couldn't wrap her tongue around it, and people didn't understand what she was talking about. One person even thought she was speaking Chinese, so she gave up on Jonche. The hotel was not really a hotel. It was an upstairs room rented out by a family 2 alleys away from the street that was the main drag. The year was 1978, and pot and hashish had already been illegal for a few years now. The American government had paid millions of dollars to the Nepali king to ban them. Gone was the Eden Hashish Center, where hippies used to flock to buy quality hash and grass and receive the gift of a calendar with blue-collar Krishna and Shiva with a snake around his neck. The hashish business had moved underground and wanted to be on the lookout for the cops who roamed the streets and who on occasion took the specially long-haired and unshaven hippie for overnight trip to the station. Many hippies had stopped coming to Kathmandu, and restaurant owners in Freak Street bemoaned that the tourist hub has shifted to Tamil, where cleaner, more athletic-looking foreigners with money and trekking gear stayed before they went on their long hikes to the Annapurna and Everest region. The new tourists flew into the city in contrast to the hippies, who used to travel by land in their beat-up, colorful Volkswagen, passing through Turkey, then Iran into Afghanistan, then Pakistan into India, and finally Kathmandu. Still, every few months, a psychedelic hippie van could be seen parked at Basantapur Darbar Square at the mouth of Freak Street, where peddlers sold statues of gods and goddesses, bells and dorjes, and pipes and hookahs for smoking, and where some pot and hashish still pass through furtive hands.
Samra Upadhyay, thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, if you would turn your attention once again, and we'll hear an excerpt from Jasmine Ward's Sing Unburied Sing.
Jojo. I like to think I know what death is. I like to think that it's something I could look at straight. When Pop tell me he need my help and I see that black knife slid into the belt of his pants, I follow Pop out the house, try to keep my back straight, my shoulders even as a hanger. That's how Pop walks. I try to look like this is normal and boring, so Pop will think I've earned these 13 years. So Pop will know I'm ready to pull what needs to be pulled, separate innards from muscle, organs from cavities. I want Pop to know I can get bloody. Today's my birthday. I grab the door so it don't slam, ease it into the jam. I don't want Ma'am or Kayla to wake up with none of us in the house. Better for them to sleep. Better for my little sister Kayla to sleep, because on nights when Leonie's out working, she wake up every hour, sit straight up in the bed, and scream. Better for Grandma Ma'am to sleep, because the chemo done dried her up and howled her out the way the sun and the air do water oaks. Pop weaves in and out of the trees, straight and slim and brown as a young pine tree. He spits in the dry red dirt, and the wind makes the trees wave. It's cold. This spring is stubborn. Most days it won't make way for warmth. The chill stays like water in a bad draining tub. I left my hoodie on the floor in Leonie's room where I sleep, and my t-shirt is thin, but I don't rip my arms. If I let the cold goad me, I know when I see the goat, I'll flinch or frown when Pop cuts the throat. And Pop, being Pop, will see.
All right, we're getting to the good part, you guys. We're getting to the part where you get stuff. Not that that wasn't the good part. That was the great part. But this is the part where you get stuff. And it's my job to introduce the head judge of the inaugural competition. Phil Cly is a National Book Award-winning author of Redeployment, and he is here to present to our finalists.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the Aspen Institute. This has been an absolute privilege and pleasure, and thank you to my fellow judges. It's been wonderful discussing these great books with you. So, I have some lovely citations here, and the first one is for Leslie Neka Arima, What It Means When a Man Falls from the Sky, from Riverhead Books. What We Lose by Cinci Clements, from Viking. Exit West, Mohsin Hamid will be, the citation will be accepted by Mohsin's editor and the VP and editorial director at Riverhead Books, Rebecca Salatin. Mad Country by Samra Upadhyay from Soho Press. And finally, on behalf of Jesmyn Ward, Sing Unburied Sing, Catherine Belden, Jesmyn's editor and executive editor at Scribner. And it is now my pleasure to introduce the directors of Aspen Words, Adrian Brodeur and Jamie Kravitz.
Thank you, Michelle Martin. Thank you so much. It's almost time. But before we announce the first ever winner of the Aspen Words Literary Prize, we just have a few people to thank.
Hi, everyone. I know you're really ready to hear and not hear from me, so we'll be quick. But I want to thank you all first and foremost for being here tonight. I know people have come from far afield. There are people from Aspen, people from Washington, people from Brooklyn. Thank you for being here. I want to thank once again the anonymous donors who made this possible. It's really an extraordinary gift that came our way. I want to thank the rest of the Aspen Words staff who's not up here on stage with us, without whom this would not be possible. Carol and Tori, I know you're up there doing important things and you're phenomenal. But also everyone in Aspen who's doing a live stream right now. Marie Kahn, Elizabeth Nix, and Ellie Scott, thank you all very much for your hard work. I want to thank, there's an artist by the name of Michael Lorsum who made this prize for us from the Anderson Ranch Arts Center in Aspen. It exceeded our expectations in every way, and we're honored to give this away tonight. And lastly, thank you to everyone in this room who works every day toward the idea that books matter, to the people who believe in this room and listening that reading makes lives more valuable, and that we're enriched by deep thinking and by art.
And I would just like to add quickly to that I think we all know that writers write books, but I think sometimes we forget that in order to get a book into the world, to birth it and publish it, I mean, this is a massively collaborative endeavor. And although we're celebrating tonight these 5 finalists and these beautiful, beautiful works of fiction, I think we also need to celebrate all the people who work very hard behind the scenes to make books happen. And while I can see no one in the room right now, I saw many of you earlier, and I'm talking about agents and editors and publicists and marketing people and booksellers and reviewers, and above all, readers, because books cannot survive without readers. So thank you, all of you. And now, the moment of truth. Jamie, come closer. And the winner is Mohsin Hamid for Exit West. Would Becky Salatan please come up?
Yes, I'm just through one of the magic devices. I'm very sorry Mohsin can't be here. He lives far away, but through one of those magic devices that he uses in Exit West, the portals, he's actually kind of here with us.
Exit West is a novel about migration and how our world is changing and could change, and how we are all migrants and how we can find an optimistic future together. And I'm really grateful to be honored with this prize in particular, which is a prize that looks to books to have an impact on the world. I'd like to thank the judges, and I'd like to thank the other writers who are finalists, and just say that it means a great deal to me to have my work recognized in this way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was a wonderful event for me. It was a wonderful event for me to do today. And thank you to Aspen. Thank you to everyone who works with me at NPR. All that remains is for me to let you know that just outside those doors is the best part of many award ceremonies. I keep saying that. I only like the party parts and the presents, but right outside those doors there will be wine and hors d'oeuvres. There are also books for sale, and books are one of the few things about which I would say to love it is to possess it. Hold it in your hands, pass it to someone you love. I believe there are some floating about that have been signed, which is a special thing to pick up. So thank you so very much for coming. Thank you for being here. Congratulations to all of our finalists and to Exit West.